Uh, an official good morning and welcome to the life and times of ... So we'll just have to find out who the ... is. A great welcome to everybody this morning. Looking forward to the story from Mpumelelo. Lee, I'm not sure if you want to kick off with anything before we hand over to Mpumelelo. No, great, fantastic. So Mpumelelo, the stage is yours, as they say in the classics. So away you go.
All right, good morning to everyone again. As I was saying to Ivan earlier on, having to try and squeeze one's life in 30 minutes is going to be a bit of a challenge. I am a bit of a talkative guy, but I've been working on myself of late to make sure that if I'm given 5 minutes, that's the time I take to do anything. All right. Also, I haven't had to speak of myself that much. It's always in snippets, but not trying to summarize a whole story. All right, yeah, as you would see with the heading, it says the life and the times of. I did say before that my name is Mpumelelo. It does mean success. I really enjoy that name. Best name a mother can give to a child. If there's one thing she did very well was to give me that name. My surname is Mtembu. I'm not going to go into the history of it, but it had changed from something else prior. So my initial surname 3 generations earlier was Dembe. But then when they came to South Africa, they changed it to Mtembu. All right. So yeah, I was born in the East Rand, in a township called Katlehong. It's closer to Alberton and Germiston, for those who know those towns much better, who may not know Katlehong. And I was born to 2 factory workers. So my mother worked he worked in a molding company where they did picture frames for mirrors, for pictures, for anything that you want to put it in the frame. So she was a little bit artistic in that way as well. It was a bit of a tough job because she had to pick up the actual molding, so the wood that you use to cut and shape it, and she would walk up and down the stairs with it and still have to do the entire thing and finish the frame. My dad worked as a bottler, so they used to cook bottle and make bottles for a company called Metal Box. Yeah, so they were factory workers, and I have 4 siblings. My elder sister is late, and there's a sister after that, and then I'm right in the middle, and then I have a younger brother and a younger sister. So I used to tease my siblings and say everything rotates around the center, and then would have a whole fight around that. Uh, so yeah, just a little bit about my mother. She was a very strict person, very imposing personality. It was her way or the highway. If she says something, that's how it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be done. Very consistent person. One trait I wish I had from her, she was very, very consistent. If she did something, she did it, and she did it consistently all the time at the same time. Very hardworking as well. She taught me a lot about work ethic and why it's important to pull your weight. Very giving, as little as she used to have. She was a very, very giving person. We used to complain that we don't have much, and she gives away the little that we have. Very fashionable. She loved clothes. Perfectionist. I take that from her. Quite perfectionist myself. Something that is good and bad, and I try to work at times. Very staunch Christian. If there's anything that she contributed in our lives, given all the difficulty, that helped us a lot was just how strong she was in her faith. And that, for me, was just an absolute amazing thing, because she was having difficulties in life, but she never lost her faith in the midst of all that. Very athletic. She used to run long distance. I do the same as well. I even wake up my sons, 9 and 6, and I get them running in the mornings. My father on the other side was very democratic. Was the kind of guy who would listen to you, give you your chance to speak and hear what you have to say. Very unassuming, very humorous. He liked telling jokes, but he was inattentive. So he wasn't the kind of guy who will pay attention to important things. Probably the biggest thing which affected us badly is that he was a very irresponsible person. And I'll speak a little bit about that as we continue. Very fashionable himself, probably the only common thing they had between the two of them. Very athletic. My dad at some stage was a professional soccer player. Very musical. So all of us at home sing, except my eldest and late sister. but we were musicians. If there's any great memory that we used to have, that we'll sit around the table and we'll start singing. And that's what our evenings would be like. But between the two of them put together, it was a broken relationship. I don't, in my mind, ever remember my parents being happy with each other. I don't have that picture in my head. Even as young as I was 5, they were fighting a lot. They were fighting all the time. At times it would be physical as well. So there was a bit of that brokenness in the family, and you'll see the thread as we go through. All right. So for primary school, I went to a school called Monde Primary School. Was the best school in the township at that time. And the story around that is that my grandfather had taken me to a different school. And my mother insisted, given the imposing nature that she insisted that I will go nowhere else but to that school. So I had to go back to pre-primary so that she can register me the following year in that school. And quite frankly, the best decision she ever made, because that school was a great foundation. I, I, the love of learning and reading books happened when I was at school because the headmistress insisted that we read a lot. And because of that, I ended up being very proficient in English in standard 1 already, even though I was in a township school, and it was unusual that you found township kids being able to be proficient in English at that time. She was very good. She used to make sure that she goes to London, get companies to sponsor our school because it wasn't allowed in South Africa. And we used to have 2 hours extra. So when everybody finishes schools at 2, we'll finish at 4. And she used to use those 2 hours to teach us all the stuff that was not in the Bantu education, all the stuff we were not supposed to learn. So every time when the police come and the inspector of education come, we used to have to run around the whole school, putting away and hiding books and hiding all the extra stuff that we were learning. So that's what I appreciated about that school, is that we had a very great foundational or early learning foundation. That's also at the time when my parents separated. I think I was in standard, I was in sub B. I don't know what in grades it is now. Yeah, I was in sub B, and my parents separated, so we had to go live at my grandmother's place. And what that meant is that I had to walk about 3 kilometers to school every morning and 3 kilometers coming back. You can imagine that for a 8-year-old, that distance is quite telling. One great thing is that I was doing very well at school. I mean, I was an 8th grade student. I was doing so well that I became quite popular, that even when overseas companies would come and donate money and donate books at our school, I used to be the one that has to welcome them and speak to the rest of the school as to what is happening. And I think that contributed a lot to the self-esteem and the confidence that I had in standing and speaking in front of people. Um, Between my parents separating, they tried patching things up. And this was between when I did primary and high school. So they decided to buy a new house together. And so we moved to this new place. But in them trying to patch things up, it just did not work. It just fell apart again. So again, my mother found herself single parenting 4 kids. My elder sister was living with my uncle at that time. Now, the life that we live was that my mother woke us up 4:30 every single morning. It didn't matter whether it was a Sunday, it didn't matter whether it was Saturday, it didn't matter whether it was school day. 4:30 we're up in the morning. So we wake up 4:30, we read the Bible, you pray, and then the day starts. She loved for a house to be clean. So that house will be cleaned to spick and span. So even today I can do anything. I can wash curtains, clean windows, because I was taught that stuff. But also it was very much a strong Christian living and environment. I did say that my mother was a staunch Christian. So we would not miss a church on Sunday. It was unheard of in my house. You just did not miss church. And she also then taught us a lot of principles, even though she was struggling with the 4 of us. She taught us that you never live beyond your means. She would teach us how you treat people. She would teach us why it's important to earn your keep in life, and how generally to live a good life. But at that time, it was when poverty was becoming even strong. The number of days I've heard my mother cry because she didn't know what she was going to feed us, I cannot even count in my hands. Sometimes she would make us visit people so that at least maybe we could have supper there if those people at some stage realize that it's eating time, they have to dish out. So she'd do that as well. The poverty at home was so strong that I would say that when you walked in the house, you could smell it. I don't know if I can explain what the smell of poverty is like, and you could feel it as well. That's how strong it was. It's also very debilitating at the same time. And growing up, I made a promise to myself that I'll never be poor again, and that it's going to stop with my parents. And I actually made my brother also to agree with me that we will never be poor in our lives. So yeah, that was the home life. So it was time to go to high school. Now the story around getting to high school was very, very interesting. So we were at church, and this gentleman was talking to my mother, and he says to her, your son is so intelligent, he's so clever. You should just make all means possible that he goes to white schools or he goes to multiracial schools. Now, I was standing next to them when they were having this conversation, and I don't think my mother realized how that sat so strongly in my spirit or in my heart. She took it lightly, but for me, it became very, very serious. So my mother used to send me to town to buy things and pay accounts and so forth. And every time I'd go to town, I'd see these kids turning a corner. Remember, I live in Katlehong, and she's sending me to Germiston. Every time I'm in the taxi, these kids are turning a corner and they're going to the school. So one day I decided I'm getting off the taxi. I'm going to follow these kids. When I followed them, I saw where Germiston High School was. I got to understand also that when registration or enrollment was taking place, and remember, I'm 11, 12 years old at this time. So I took the forms, I filled them out myself, never told my mother, and I submitted them. Interestingly, I got a letter. There wasn't calling you at that time. You got letters. So I got a letter that said I should come and write an assessment test. Out of the 250 kids that came to write the assessment test, they were only going to choose 16 Black kids, and I was one of the 16. And I got a letter that I'm accepted, and my mother didn't know this. So now for the first time, I had to reveal to her that in actual fact, I haven't registered myself. I'm going to that school. And when I told her, my mother was so worried. She was like, how are we going to pay for the school fees? And my answer to her was, I remember very well, I said to her, how are we going to pay for the school fees? I don't know. What I do know is that I'm not going to a township school. That I'm certain about. I said to her, the other part, I don't know how to answer you. So ended up going to Germiston High School. My mother tried very much to buy me a blazer, very expensive. I think it was like 400 Rand at that time for her. It was beyond anything that, I mean, she was earning 700 Rand. The contrast between my primary school and high school, I can't even explain. When I went into high school the first time, I came back and I told my mother that I think I'm at a university. I don't think it's a school, just because of how well resourced it was and the difference between primary school and high school. But high school was some of my best times in life. I was exposed to a lot of things that otherwise I would have not been exposed to if I didn't go to that school. The school took me to different parts of the country. I was doing very well at school. And I even got into the leadership role at school. all this is happening and my school fees is not paid. So standard 6 was not paid. Standard 7 was not paid. Standard 8 was not paid. And I used to dread that intercom because every time it came on, and they say Mpumelelo Matembu, because that's how they would say my name and surname, I knew that it was about me having to answer why school fees has not been paid yet. And I'm just a teenager. I couldn't answer that. Or at best, I could say, look, I'll talk to my dad, who wasn't even there. I just had to say something. And this was at the time when my dad had really disappeared. His disappearance was very gradual. He would miss 2 nights at home and come back and miss 3 nights and miss a week. And eventually he'd miss a month and eventually he would just not pitch up. Now, every time I'd have to go to school, I'd let him know that I need taxi fare. And it would be Monday morning and he wouldn't pitch. And now I'm dressed, I've got my school books, I've got everything, and now I don't have a taxi fare. So I'd have to walk around the streets just asking different people, asking neighbors if they could give me money. And when they would, then I would quickly run to the taxis and catch one to school. It would happen at times that I wouldn't even have a taxi fare to go back home. So again, I'd borrow from the pupils that I was, from the kids and the friends that I was at school with. I hated borrowing so much because you'd borrow so much, you'd run out of people to borrow from. So it took me a long time in my life to be able to get help from someone else because that experience of always having to ask was just that difficult. There would be times where I'd go play sports. Remember, my parents were athletic, so I was very athletic myself. Not only was I good academically, I was good in sports as well. And we would go with the bus to go play at another school. We'd come back probably at about 4 or 5 o'clock. Parents would pick up kids. Then they would go home. And I'll be left alone because my dad hasn't come to pick me up. There are a number of days where I'd sit at school waiting for him until like 8 p.m. at night. Eventually, I learned a trick that I could go to the police station and tell them that I'm stranded and I need a transport to home. And I'd done that a couple of times. The problem with that is that when you get to the police station, you have to wait for them to find a car that will take you there. So sometimes it would mean waiting for an hour and only getting home at about 9 o'clock at night. Also, remember, I'm a teenager at this time. I was doing so well at school that one of the teachers heard that SAB was giving out bursaries, and she put me in that program. And out of 120 kids around Gauteng, I was one of the 10 that got that bursary. Now, SAB paid for my standard 6 that was owing. They paid for the standard 7 that was owing. They paid for the standard 8 that I was in. They paid standard 9 that I was going to, and they paid matric all in one check. My mother was just in tears. She just couldn't believe that faith and that belief that I am going to this school and nowhere else could be met halfway in that way. And so it would happen at times that I would go work at SAB during school holidays. And in 2 weeks, I would earn more money than my mother would earn in 3 months. And it obviously meant whatever I'm earning all of it goes into helping in the house. While I was in high school, I was appointed as a deputy head boy. I was very popular at school. Was a great exposure to the world as well. I started traveling because school will take me to different parts of the country. I was doing very well at school, but trouble was still rife at home. Right? Finished high school. That was in 96. Went to tertiary. I went to Technikon Witwatersrand, which is now called University of Johannesburg in Bunting Road in Auckland Park. I could say that was one of my most difficult times in life because I lived in school now and I had to figure out a lot of things on my own. Yes, I was figuring things out on my own in high school, but now I had to figure out how do I eat because the number of days I'll spend at Rares without having food, and you'd have that burning sensation in your stomach because you're hungry, but you're also having to concentrate and study and learn at the same time. I would do that. I used to put a note in my room when I was staying at res that I'm not in, because I didn't want people to know what I was going through. But secondly, so that they also don't distract me, because there was a lot of distractions at tertiary, you know. I had one thing in my mind, that this is my only way, is to get education, is the only way I can escape this. And my thoughts were, other kids know what other alternatives they have, so I cannot let them distract me. So yeah, again, went through the whole thing of unpaid fees. In actual fact, first year, my aunt gave me 2,000 Rand to register. And that year I needed 16,000 Rand. So there was 14,000 Rand short that still had to be paid. Got no idea where that was going to come from. The number of days I spent going to the rector's office and just saying to him, look, you cannot deny me education. I need this education. You can't send me home. You can't. I lived like that for about 2 years when I was at Wits University. At some point, I'd watch the kids that have, and I'd feel like these people don't even care about education. And I care about education, but I'm struggling to get education and to pay for it, because I'd see how they just come to school and not even go to a lecture room. So when third year came, I decided that let me find a job, because it was difficult to have to every time go and explain why you can't pay. So third year, I went to find a job, and now I had to start balancing working and studying at the same time. So I would go to work I'd start work at about 8, I'd finish at 4, I'd go to lectures and start at about 5:30. I'll finish at 8:30 at night. When I finish 8:30, I would walk all the way to the taxis. It would be quite dark. I'd walk to the taxis, get home at about 9:30, wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Remember, I was woken up 4:30 every day, so now it's in my blood and it's in my system. Wake up 4 o'clock, study, start getting ready at 6, go to work, and I lived like that for that whole year. So fortunately, with that first job, it was a job at F&B. And because it was F&B, they gave me a loan. So I paid for all the money that I was owing at Vets Tech, and I paid for the year that I was in. What was great is that because I was an employee, I'd pay back the loan without any interest. So, and also how I got the job is my aunt used to send me to go bank the church's money, because she was the secretary, she was the treasurer at church. So I'd go to F&B every time, bank this money. And then one day I speak to this lady at F&B. I say to him, you know, I'm so good at stuff. If you could just give me a job, I can show you how good I am. So she laughs. And then she says, okay, come back on Monday. I come back on Monday, and just like that, I was interviewed and I was told to come back the following day. And that's how I got my first job. But now getting a job meant that I become the breadwinner at home. So all the pressure of now becoming a father at age 19 started piling up. I had to make sure that there's food in the house. Remember, I wasn't paying school fees, so my brother was going through the same thing. So I had to now start paying his school fees. I remember back then you would still get a checkbook, so I used to write a 500 Rand check to pay for my brother's school fees. At that time, in the first job, I was earning 2,100 Rand. I was saving 1,000 Rand. I'd pay 500 Rand for my brother's school fees. I'd be left with 600 Rand. I would use 200 Rand for transport to and fro work. And then the 400 Rand, I would use it for food and groceries at home. So I'd get paid on the 20th. By the 22nd, I'd have nothing left but the transport money. I lived like that for quite some time. Horribly bored in that job, but one great thing is that it helped me pay for my school fees. but also for the first time, I bought my first car. Now, my mother cried. She cried. She could not believe that I'd put so far in life as to be in a position to buy a car. It was just too far-fetched in her mind that it was possible that we could do that. But now what it also meant at the same time is that I had to stop my own education because I was trying to get a BTech, what would be an equivalent to a degree, because now I was paying my brother's school fees and I was paying my sister's school fees, and I couldn't also pay for a car or own a car and also pay for my own self. So I had to stop. That's why up to this day, I only have a diploma. I was so sure in my life that I'd have so much education, but that's another story for another day. It was also at that time that I registered my first company. So all this is happening, but I still have this ambition to have a company. I registered my first company. We were doing software program for township schools because we wanted them to have the same administrative systems that multiracial schools were having. I did well with the first client, but there was a lot I didn't understand about business yet. And so there was a lot of mistakes that were made during that time. But that's when at 20, I had my first company registered. Second job was at Sambo. That was a short period of time. I really didn't like that job. I had to work on Sundays, which for me was diabolical. The pay didn't get any better. And Sambo closed down. I don't know if any of you remember when Sambo closed down. So it meant I was out of work for 8 months. I was unemployed. So I had to go through waking up in the morning, people going to work, and I don't have a work to go to. And I have to now figure out, how do I live given all these responsibilities that I had at home? Okay. I had timed to be finished by this time. So it's 28 minutes after 8. I'm not sure what you want me to do. Should I stop it here? And yeah, one of you would have to advise what I should do.
Yeah, Mpumelelo, we are literally sitting at your feet. I know it's not easy on Zoom, but I'm telling you, we are all just listening with bated breath because we are in awe of what you've accomplished. And also not just that, I think just your willingness to share, you know, and to be vulnerable with us and to be true to yourself. And it's really an honor to be listening to your story, and I'd hate to rush it. So I think we all feel, I'm speaking for everybody, but I can see the nods. So if we can press the pause button here, and if we can pick this up again tomorrow, how do you feel about it?
It's perfectly fine. I'm okay with that.
Lovely, lovely. Okay, well, thanks everybody. You'll be able to see some of the comments, Mpumelelo. I think we've all just, their words like inspiring and all amazing, and you know, power of a decision. Yeah, thank you. So all good. We will see you tomorrow. Look forward to part 2. We're in the habit now of series, so we've got it down. Enforce the tone. So now, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you. Part 2 this.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.